night here, 10 nights. If you can click that link, inshallah ta'ala. We really need everyone's support in Midnight ta'ala. As you've seen, I hope, inshallah, the benefit of the work go up and the quality of the work go up, inshallah ta'ala. That is first and foremost due to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows upon us of His bounty always, and then your support. So we want to remind you all, inshallah, to please support the work, inshallah. Also tune into the webathon, which will be loaded with gems on how to prepare yourself for the last 10 nights. That's coming up this Tuesday, inshallah ta'ala, and that information is in the link below. And before we have cited the last 10 nights, we've cited another Canadian, alhamdulillah. Dr. Nazir Khan is with us, our president of Yaqeen Canada, director of research strategy, and of course Sister Ruhi Taha from Chicago Sharif, as you all like to call it. Alhamdulillah. So Dr. Nazir, how are you?
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum. Everything's good. I was hoping you had used up your Canadian jokes on Sheikh Ibrahim, but mashallah, there's like no end to that.
No, man. I feel like Google, the algorithm feeds you unlimited Canadian jokes. I think I'm going to go to like ChatGPT and ask them for Canadian jokes. I wonder if AI is as ruthless towards the Canadians as American Google is, right?
Yeah. Well, I got AI to come up with Ramadan-themed dad jokes. So you guys, yeah, it might give you guys a run for your money. We might have, yeah. Well, so this is courtesy of ChatGPT, but the joke that it came up with was, what does the Imam say when he shows up at your house unannounced just before Fajr? You're having suhoor with your family, the doorbell rings, you open the door, and it's the Imam. He just shows up unannounced.
I'm not sure.
Suhoor prize!
Suhoor prize.
That is courtesy of artificial intelligence.
I mean, that's a good sign that AI has not caught up to humanity yet, right? It's a good sign. Not bad, not bad. I'm sure the kids will love that. We'll attribute it to you. Sheikh Abdullah, what do you rate it?
That's about a 3.5.
Wow.
Wait, out of 10 or out of 5?
No, out of 10, Sheikh, out of Asha.
Blessed to have you both, inshallah, and we're going to, inshallah ta'ala, go ahead and get started with the night ta'ala. So today we're actually, inshallah ta'ala, going to go with Sheikh Abdullah first, inshallah ta'ala, and we'll go with the order of the verses of Juz 18. Alhamdulillah. Sheikh Abdullah, please start us off.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala amma ba'd. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of us in this beautiful month of Ramadan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow any of the hardship that's being faced by our brothers and sisters around the world, particularly now we're talking about Philistine. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate their pain and suffering and accept our du'as for them. With that being the case, I really want to talk about that which affects human beings in general, being that this month of Ramadan is a month of a lot of opportunity for us, spiritual opportunity, bonus month. I mean, being that a lot of the things that we do will receive multiplication in ajr, inshallah, such as Laylatul Qadr, the last 10 nights, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. But with that diligence in the actions of khair, it's important for us to recognize that when we do those actions of khair, it can take us away from an action of evil. And that action of evil, no doubt about it, is from shaitan that tries to either convince us or speak to our nafs with the waswas within our sudur, min sharri al-waswas, min sharri al-waswas al-khannas, alladhina yuwaswisu fi sudur an-nas. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the chapter of Nas, the one that yuwaswisu fi sudur, the one that whispers in the sudur, in the chest of the breast of the human being. And that's what I want to talk about when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a clear warning, as He does numerous times in the Quran, about shaitan. He says after A'udhu Billahi min Shaitan Rajim in the chapter of Nur, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu la tattabi'u khutuwati shaitan wa man yattabi' khutuwati shaitan fa innahu ya'muru bil fahsha'i wal munkar wa lawla fadlullahi alaykum wa rahmatuhu ma zaka minkum min ahadin abadan walakin Allah yuzakki man yasha'u wallahu sami'un alim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says here, believers do not follow in Satan's footsteps. Let him who follows in Satan's footsteps remember that Satan bids people to indecency and evil. So that's the first part. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling on us. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Those who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that told us about shaitan. And shaitan linguistically comes from shaitana, which means ba'uda, which means that he is far away. And as some scholars mentioned, far away from the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, far away from obedience. And he wants to call you to that, as he mentions in numerous places in the Quran. He will come to the front, the back, and on your sides, to the degree that you will not even be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And shaitan, subhanallah, is someone that worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is a creature that worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or recognizes Allah's greatness, let's say. Recognizes Allah's greatness and his power over him, as mentioned in numerous verses in the Quran. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning us. He's reminding us that Satan is a clear enemy, and do not follow his footsteps. And he uses khutawat to show that his footsteps, to show that it is subtle. The actions of disobedience, which is important for us, particularly in this month of Ramadan, to trace back and to think sometimes even as hard as we can on our shortcomings, to serve as a motivation for us to do good deeds. Rather, to be more specific, to serve as a means for the inkisar wa iftiqar wa dhul of the qalb. When we think about those evil deeds, those khutawat of shaitan that has approached us and has approached upon us to where we actually did something, we should think about that to where it softens our heart and it breaks our heart and it makes us debased in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which will influence us to do actions of returning to him and tawbah. And Ibn al-Qayyim mentions this in his book, The Shower of Good Utterances and the Invocation of God, Wabil al-Sayyid, talking about how the actions can serve as a sabab for the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the evil deeds. And shaitan is the one that calls you to that. Allah is reminding you, and it is a nahi, it is a prohibition. Look out and watch out from the khutawat of shaitan. Do not follow them. And then he says here, after all, he says here, وَمَنْ يَتَّبِعْ خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ فَإِنَّهُ يَأْمُرُ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنكَرِ. Allah is telling you why. He's saying, whoever follows these evil pathways of shaitan, for verily Satan bids people to indecency and evil. Fahsha, and the scholars mention fahsha is a little more general. It says, مَا قَبُحَ النَّفْسُ مِنَ الْقَوْلِ وَالْفِعْلِ. What the self finds nasty and finds gross, and that is not actually a beautiful thing within themselves, from the statements and in the actions. That is the fahsha. Something that is indesirable or distasteful. That is what Satan calls you to. And as we see in society, as times go by and as the eras pass and the years pass, and different ways of understanding what is decency, what is morality, the Sharia has given us the sirat al-mustaqim, the straight path. Within that is telling us about decency and morality. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning us that there will be times that Satan will influence people, what time and place throughout history, and he will call you to indecency and the evil. He will call you to the indecency and the evil. And the indecency here are as we talked about, the fahsha, and the munkar is what the Sharia calls to avoid. That's the munkar. The munkar is what the Sharia calls you to avoid. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues on and says here after that, وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَرَحْمَتُهُ مَا زَكَى مِنْكُمْ مِنْ أَحَدٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and if it wasn't for Allah's bounty and his mercy on you, none of you would have ever attained purity. And that's what I want to end on here, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the deen of Islam, it's important for us to remember that if it wasn't for the deen of Islam, the faith of Islam, our belief, our knowing who Allah is, and then our trying our level best to live up to what Allah wants from us, the Sharia, the deen of Islam, the way that we manifest our love of Allah, praying 5 times a day, being good to your neighbor, giving zakat, telling the people about your faith and having pride and honor in that. That in and of itself, the Islam being our anchor and our understanding of what life is about, our worldview being through the Quran, being through Islam, that if that was not there, it would be difficult for us and we would be misguided. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions here, none of you would have ever attained purity if it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's bounty upon us. And to know that it is the fadl and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that brought you where you are today in the levels of obedience. Any obedience that you have, always say there's no guidance, and if it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I would not be guided. So remembering that in this beautiful month of Ramadan, and after that Satan is a clear enemy, and that he will be subtle in calling you away from guidance. And those that have guidance and they recognize their guidance, remember that it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us humble in front of him and in front of his creation. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us those that are humble, in this month of Ramadan and the month after that.
Ameen. Jazakallah Shaykh. Beautiful words. Jazakumullah khair. And with that, inshallah ta'ala, we'll pass it to Dr. Nadim. Tafadhal, Shaykh.
Jazakallah khair. So the note that Sheikh Abdullah finished on about guidance ties in perfectly with the reflection that I wanted to share about the theme of light and darkness and how it ties into guidance in our lives. So when we look at Ayatul Nur, verse 35 of Surah An-Nur, this is one of the most famous verses in the Quran. Allahu nur as-samawati wal-ard. God is the light of the heavens and the earth. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us an example. Mathalu nurihi. He gives us an analogy of the intensity of that light. And companions like Ubay ibn Ka'b and others, they said, Mathalu nurihi fi qalb al-mu'min. The example of his light in the heart of the believer. In other words, the light of guidance which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses the believer with, it transforms the way that they see the world. Islam is not just a set of merely theoretical beliefs or a cultural label or some identity tag. Islam changes the way that we see everything around us. It influences our choices, our priorities. It shapes our major life decisions. Islam is a complete worldview. And that comes about through pursuing that light in one's life. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the intensity of that light, the lamp that is in the niche in the glass that's like a brilliant star, lit from the pure olive oil that's from the blessed tree. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Nurun ala nur, light upon light. Yahdillahu li nurihi man yasha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides to his light whomever he wills. Now, that verse gives us the analogy of the intensity of light. And on the following page, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the analogy of the intensity of darkness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes somebody who is in the darkness of the bottom of the ocean. أو كظلمات في بحر اللجي يغشاه موج من فوقه موج. He's covered by clouds above which, by waves above which are waves. من فوقه سحاب, above which are clouds. ظلمات بعضها فوق بعض. Layers of darkness, one above the other. إذا أخرج يده لم يكد يراها. If he stretches his hand out in front of his face, he doesn't even come close to seeing his hand. ومن لم يجعل الله له نورا فما له من نور. Whomever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not given his divine light, such a person will have no light. Now, this example that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us of the intensity of darkness, subhanAllah, I had an opportunity to get a glimpse of such intense darkness, not at the bottom of the ocean, but when I went spelunking, which is exploring underground caves, in Rat's Nest Cave in the Canadian Rockies, when you go down a pathway of caves 4 kilometers deep into the mountains, you get to a point where if you turn off your light, there is no sight and no sound. The darkness feels almost suffocating. And people get trapped in these dark caves and they start to have visual hallucinations, pulsating lights, geometrical patterns. It even distorts their perception of time. Now imagine you're trapped in that cave and a rescuer comes down and they shine that flashlight on you. Initially that light will be almost jolting, right? It'll be almost blinding. But then that light becomes necessary for you to navigate your way out of the cave, to avoid falling into a crevice, to avoid stumbling over rocks. And that is how it is with the divine light that illuminates our path in life and shows us the dangers to avoid and shows us the opportunities to take. We often focus on Nur al-Hissi, or the physical light that is seen by the basar, by the eyesight. But there is also Nur al-Ma'nawi, the light of meaning which is perceived by basira, insight, spiritual perception. What's really interesting about Ayat al-Nur is that this verse comes after a series of passages in which we have the mention of Radd al-Basar, lowering the gaze. So it is as though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us that when you avert your gaze, in order to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by restraining from a lustful gaze, for example, when you avert your perception, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expands your spiritual perception so that you see that which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you perceive those opportunities that bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You perceive the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all around you. And what's interesting is the very next verse also shows us a very profound connection. فِي بُيُوتٍ أَذِنَ اللَّهُ أَن تُرْفَعَ وَيُذْكَرَ فِيهَا اسْمُهُ. Right after Ayat al-Nur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this light is being manifested in the houses in which the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being practiced. So dhikrullah, the remembrance of Allah, is what intensifies that light within our hearts. And Ibn al-Qayyim, he shows that ghafla, heedlessness, is what extinguishes that light until a person cannot tell the truth from the falsehood or from falsehood from truth. That is the difference between dhikr and ghafla. And when you think about it, it's interesting because society is almost engineered in a way to keep us in a state of perpetual ghafla or perpetual heedlessness, constantly giving us distractions. So a person comes home from work and they just collapse on the couch and start binging Netflix, or a person is standing in an elevator, they feel compelled to take out their phone and just go through their social media feed, zombie scrolling, which is interesting because that's how the Prophet Muhammad described it. مثل الذي يذكر ربه والذي لا يذكر ربه كمثل الحي والميت. The analogy of the one who engages in remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala compared to the one who doesn't is like the analogy of the one who is alive compared to one who isn't. Light brings life. Now, how do we bring that divine light into our life? There are many ways, all the acts of ibadat, but one way that I want to really emphasize is through dua, making dua specifically for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with His divine light. So if you haven't already, check out the Yaqeen Dua book, which is freely available on the website. The dua for light is mentioned therein. Allahumma ja'al fi qalbi nuran. Oh Allah, place light in my heart. Wa fi basari nuran, wa fi sam'i nuran. And in my hearing and in my seeing, in our faculties of perception. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet told us to make dua for light in our surroundings, from the 6 directions of space around us. And the dua concludes, وَجْعَلْ لِي نُورًا, or in another narration, وَجْعَلْنِي نُورًا, right? Make for me light, or make me light. The believer becomes transformed by that light. So no matter what darkness you're going through in life, whether it's the darkness of an internal struggle or the darkness of oppression, never despair that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can rescue you from that darkness and grant you His divine light. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to attain that divine light. Jazakumullah khair.
Ameen. MashaAllah, what a profound reflection. Jazakallah khair. Karamakallah, Dr. Nader. And inshallah, I have several questions about what you put forth and reflections. Inshallah, we'll get to it at the end. Ustadha Ruhi, tafadali.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So Dr. Nader's reflection there ties in beautifully into some of the contrasts we're going to see in terms of how that plays out in Surah Al-Mu'minun. I've chosen ayahs 23 through 30 to talk about briefly, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is discussing the nation of Nuh alayhi salam. So there's 2 groups of people here that are mentioned. 1, those who opposed his call, and 2, the few people who were the true believers among them who actually followed him. And it's worth noting that the stories of other nations and their prophets and messengers are also mentioned in succession in this surah. In fact, the very next passage begins in ayah 31 with, "Then we raised another generation after them." No name is mentioned for this nation, as if to understand that that's not the main point. Rather, the most relevant part here is to actually look at what we can learn from the mindset, the behavior, and the outcome of each of the 2 specific types of people that are being mentioned in all of these nations. So these verses, they actually give us insight into the Quranic worldview, that of a clear division between people's beliefs on the basis of truth and falsehood, between tawheed and shirk, and in particular here, the flawed mindset of those who are opposing the truth, as played out repeatedly throughout history. So this is the test of life, right? And a reality that we're all told to expect. It goes back to the delineation between Adam and Iblis, between Iman and Kufr, and we see it again in this surah between Musa and Fir'aun, and the Prophet ﷺ and the Quraysh. So hence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also giving us the Quranic lens through which to view ourselves as the example of the believers that are being mentioned in this surah, and as to how to align ourselves with them in order to correctly respond to the challenges that we may also encounter in our life. So the first ayah, number 23, it begins after A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا نُوحًا إِلَىٰ قَوْمِهِ فَقَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ أَفَلَا تَتَّقُونَ. Indeed, we sent Noah to his people, and he declared, "O my people, worship Allah alone. You have no other God, no God other than Him. Will you not then fear and taqoon?" That taqwa is the means to safeguarding that tawheed, or else one can easily fall into shirk, as seen as in this example and the others that are mentioned later in the surah. So Nuh's people, they were worshipping idols that they made themselves, originally out of reverence for their pious predecessors. Think about it for a minute, that how many propped up self-made idols particularly in this day and age in the material world, are people worshiping, starting with their own desire. So, jumping ahead for just a moment, the passage is going to end in the thought-provoking way with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying in ayah number 30, surely in this are lessons and signs. Inna fi dhalika la ayat, literally ayat, signs of Allah. And we always put people to the test. So this is a call for us to pause and reflect on what's really important here. Nuh alayhi salam, he's been sincere in calling to Tawheed, right? 950 years later, what happens? Only a few people actually choose to align with him and become believers. His people just kept rejecting him, and they were particular people of authority. The powerful, the wealthy, the chiefs of his community, they remained defiant and arrogant, even threatening to stone him out of town. They humiliated and slandered him and his followers in public. Their tribunals are kind of like the power of the media and politics today. So they create this false narrative and propaganda against the believers to rally their people to remain loyal. The believers are viewed as outcasts. Hence the social divide that we see in society even today between the powerful elite of society and the weak among them. So they falsely accuse Nuh of being a mere human. And a threat, somebody who was seeking authority, according to them, over his people to just serve his own ambitions. While at the same time they're branding him insane and saying he's possessed by a jinn, literally. So these contradictory and really baseless objections are take a stand for the truth. You may face criticism, even from those closest to you. You may have to stand alone at times, and even perhaps go against popular norms of society, particularly in our in times that we live in, where ideologies are just changing by the day. But we're being shown here that the believers maintain a firm stand in their faith all the time. It's really the last part of this that I want to